It is Monday, March 23rd, 2020 at 2:16 a.m. We are on section 2 of Calm by the School of Life. Section 2 is titled The Lack of Glamour of Domesticity. We are not blind to the idea that relationships might be hard. The issue comes down to where we think the difficulties might lie. Here, the surrounding culture does us no service. The history of the romantic novel, for example, is filled with examples of lovers battling against numerous obstacles. But these are of a particular sort. A pair of star-crossed souls may have to deal with the opposition of the church or a faction in government. A devastating war may tear apart childhood sweethearts. Narrow-minded and snobbish parents may poison one partner against another. Romantic writers have shown genuine commitment to exploring a range of factors that can impede the development of love. Nevertheless, one could accuse these romantics of being unhelpfully selective about what particular problems they have focused on. It isn't that a war or religious edict aren't serious, it's just that many other equally grave but also far more common challenges have tended to be ignored in their favor. Almost never has there been a romantic novel that has meticulously studied the difficulties created for a couple by the issue of laundry. Seldom has a novel articulated the distress that can be caused by differences in ideas of a suitable bedtime, or the genuine agonies that emanate from kitchen cleaning rotas. We have, in art, seldom heard of a couple who broke up because one of the parties liked to play golf too much. In part because of this oversight, couples are not sufficiently aware of the real flashpoints of love. They are therefore not prepared to devote the resources required to resolve everyday conflicts, such as whether it is acceptable to eat in the bedroom, or if it is appropriately cautious to arrive at the airport 4 hours before a flight. The more prestigious a problem, the more it attracts the patience and respect required to solve it. We can observe the benefits of this sort of humility in the world of science. Unlocking the secrets of the human genome was correctly viewed as immensely complex. Those who set out on the task therefore approached their labor with fortitude, persistence, and good humor. It was clear that this would not be an overnight win. The ability not to panic in a difficult situation hangs on our background awareness that difficulty is legitimate and expected. It helps immensely if the problems we face have a certain glamour to them. It is this that gives us the energy to attend properly to them, while what grinds down our spirits are problems that both bother us and give us the feeling that they are petty, trivial, and not worth the attention of serious people. Without meaning to, the lack of focus on domestic life, of which romanticism is guilty, has made us unnecessarily short-tempered around the scratchy reality of conjugal life. We come into relationships with a host of ideas about what is normal. Without much thinking about it, you've maybe always just assumed that when having a meal, serving dishes should be placed on the table, so that you can help yourself. Then you get together with someone who's great in so many ways, but it turns out that they think it's really strange and annoying to put serving dishes on the table. To them, it seems obvious that you should really load up your plates at the stove and then sit down to eat. Like so many painful areas of conflict, it seems ridiculously minor when described coldly on a page. It's almost impossible to believe a couple could get frantic on a matter of this kind, such as whether it's time to invest in a high-end new fridge, or whether it is okay for one person to check up on the other's consumption of fruit and vegetables. Yet this is, in truth, the stuff of which all of our relationships are made. When problems have not been given the attention they require, two members of a couple can fall into highly dispiriting roles, the nagger and the shirker. The nagger has given up trying to explain what is wrong or what needs to be done. They are no longer in the business of charming and good-naturedly cajoling. They merely insist and control. They give out orders rather than suggestions. Likewise, the shirker has given up framing their complaints in sensible terms. They just leave the room, shut their ears, and bite their tongue in counterproductive ways. Both sides fail to explain the origins of their hurt and dissatisfaction. In calmer lives, point of conflict and stress in domestic existence should be taken very seriously. They should have high prestige in recognition of their complexity and role in the success of love. We should aim for a range of goals in this area. To increase patience. When we accept that an issue is intricate and serious, we are willing to be patient around it. If our partner doesn't have much insight into scuba diving or the origins of the First World War, we don't throw up our hands in contemptuous despair. we take it for granted that these are matters on which a perfectly reasonable and decent person could be confused or ignorant. To make upset reasonable. If one's partner gets very agitated about which brand of olive oil to buy or how many sheets of toilet paper it is reasonable for one person to use in a day, it's easy to mock them and make them look ridiculous. But raising the prestige of the domestic means accepting that such details are matters on which a sane and sensible person could have strong feelings. To make disagreement legitimate. On many complicated issues, it's going to make a lot of sense that there is more than one initially pretty plausible way of seeing them. After all, we accept that there might be more than one sensible approach to running a commercial aquarium or performing root canal surgery. It can be strangely tricky for us to identify what kinds of tasks actually are hard, and therefore need to be approached with a lot of respect. A child learning to play the violin might get very worked up because they feel they were not making any progress after 20 minutes. Failing to internalize that a challenge is going to be arduous is at the root of so many of our troubles. Gustav Flaubert went through his own version of painful education in the early days of his writing career. In his late 20s, he was very keen to get established as a literary figure, and he very rapidly wrote a novel, The Temptation of St. Anthony. He asked various people for their opinion, and the consensus was that he should throw the manuscript in the fire, which he did. He then set to work on his next novel, Madame Bovary, with a much more serious view of how hard the process would be and hence of how long it might take, and how often he would have to wrestle with a paragraph and change his mind about the flow of an individual sentence. It took him 5 years, but the novel was recognized as a masterpiece. There was a major reward for giving the details of the writing a lot of attention. Long-running, highly stressful domestic anxiety often circles around what looks like pedantic details. What is the right way to cook a chicken? Should newspapers be kept in the bathroom? If you say you're going to do something in 1 minute, is it okay to actually do it 8 minutes later? Is it extravagant to drink carbonated bottled water every day at home? They naturally provoke the thought that it is somewhat idiotic to get bothered by them, and so a path often recommended for a calmer relationship is that we should simply stop caring about such matters, that we should stop obsessing over details. We can compare this attitude to the one we bestow on details in the arts. Here we know that details are hugely important and that we should give them special attention. The opening words of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, "April is the cruelest month," could be changed to, "Of the months of the year, the most cruel is the fourth," and it wouldn't really matter for the literal meaning. Normally, it would be pedantic to make a fuss about the difference between cruelest and most cruel, or to get excited by the difference between April and the fourth month of the year. But in the poem, the exact vocabulary and sequence matter a lot. Eliot's phrase has a special character, sound, and rhythm. It's blunt and harsh, and it sticks in the mind. Something very similar goes on around painting. We don't get surprised if an artist ponders a precise tone of blue for half an hour, and we admire an architect for obsessing over the various textures of stone or slightly different tints of glass. In the arts, we acknowledge that small things, details, are densely packed with significance. Domestic details look small but carry big, important ideas. It might sound very odd at first to make the comparison, but the objects of domestic agitation are very like works of art. They condense complex meaning into tightly packed symbolic details. In engineering, we take it for granted that a problem with something that looks tiny can have hugely serious consequences. We accept as obvious that a 300 million pound Airbus A380, capable of taking hundreds of canopy-eating passengers serenely over the North Anatolian mountains, can be rendered unusable by a tiny hydraulic leak in the landing gear. But we balk at the notion that an adult, capable of managing the customer services division of an agricultural machinery supplier or teaching a class of 15-year-olds about the Vietnam War, can be rendered unable to function by the presence of toast crumbs on the butter or by the observation that it's a while since they last had a dental checkup. Engineers aren't thrilled when a detail turns out to be a big problem, but they've usefully recognized that sorting out the little things is a completely legitimate and important part of the task. Art and engineering are places where we've collectively managed to recognize the importance of little things. Unfortunately, the very different cultural image we have of relationships, as being about big feelings rather than little pragmatic issues, has made it hard for us to give these matters the serious attention they in fact deserve. We might typically associate panic with the presence of a difficult task or an urgent demand, but that's not quite right. What actually causes panic is a difficulty that hasn't been budgeted for a demand and that one has not been trained or prepared to meet. The road to calmer relationships, therefore, isn't necessarily about removing points of contention. It's rather about assuming that they are going to happen and that they will inevitably require quite a lot of time and thought to address. What would more ideally happen is a joint recognition from the earliest days that living with someone is one of the most difficult undertakings any of us ever assume. People may attempt the feat all the time, but this doesn't make it any easier or less grave. Properly equipped with an iron presumption of difficulty in our hearts, we would still hit problems, but our attitude towards them would change. We would not be so quick to deem them petty. We would be a little slower to anger. We might graciously spend hours discussing how to manage the bathroom or run the kitchen, and thereby help to rescue our relationships.